So recently, Colonel Luther was helping a longtime customer of ours who had mastered the sharpening bit, but still wasn't able to get his hand plane to pull off shavings like that. So Luther went over and shared with him some of the stuff that we do, and now he's able to plane like a pro. So if you're having similar issues, meaning you just can't get that final perfect surface, it feels so great. Stay with me and I'll walk you through it, and hopefully we'll solve it for you. So it doesn't need to be repeated, but I'm going to. Sharpening is number one. If the blade is not sharp, nothing else works. So if your plane is not be able to pull off shavings like this, I'm going to measure and show you the thickness. This is a digital Mitutoyo. So we'll zero it in. It's got a 0.0009, so just under 1/1000 of an inch. And your plane should be able to easily do that on most woods. If you haven't been able to sharpen like that, we did a video called 32 seconds to sharp, and it literally is that simple. We'll leave a link below. Go in and review that. You've got to get that part down, and then we can start talking about, okay, blade sharp, why can't we get this surface so that when we run our hands across it, we don't feel any marks. It's just a beautiful smooth surface. We'll let the 32 seconds to sharp video explain all of the sharpening process. So now I've got my two pieces, blade and Chipbreaker. And I'm going to say this because occasionally somebody puts it on wrong. The blade, or the Chipbreaker, sorry, which is in my right hand, there's a little lip right there. And that goes on the back side of the blade, not on the bevel side of the blade. And when that sits on there, you want to make sure that the leading edge of your Chipbreaker makes contact with the back of the blade, so that there is no way shaving can get jammed up in there. So now, where do we put it? First of all, let's put this screw back in. Now, you may notice that mine don't have the traditional slot screw. We have a conversion kit that I much prefer, using a 3/16 hex drive. And it's nice because it just doesn't slip. Now, I won't get that tight yet, but so here's the way I do it. Let's start from the beginning. I normally don't take that out. I just wanted to show you. So I take my Chipbreaker like this, put it over here, pull it back, swing it around. Now I have lots of control when I squeeze it like this between my fingers and thumb. And then back here, I'll push it forward, and I'm going to bring that to within about a 32nd of an inch of the edge. And I don't get too terribly worked up about that, but I do want it close. Now, I'm going to tighten that up, and this needs to be really tight because part of the adjustment, the depth of your cut, the part of the plane that actually adjusts the depth of cut acts on that little rectangle, and it has to pull the blade along with it. So you have to make sure that that is sufficiently tight. I'd consider that screw conversion kit. Makes it so much easier. But the new style, the Chipbreaker, actually looks an awful lot like the blade. So you want to always make sure that the blade is in the bottom, and I've had folks turn around and get that turned around. So blade is sitting on the bottom, Chipbreaker's on the top. There are 3 points of contact that you want to be concerned with. The back of the blade laying on the face of the frog, so you want to always make sure that there's no debris on the face of the frog. You want that to sit very positively. This is called the yoke. When you spin the adjustment knob, or in this case the adjustar, in a clockwise rotation, that yoke is going to act on that slot on the Chipbreaker, and it's going to bring the blade out for a thicker shaving. Of course, reverse it, a thinner shaving. So that's something you have to pay attention to. You want to make sure that goes into place. This is called the lateral adjustment lever. This is what enables you to adjust the blade so that your shaving is coming off equal thickness. In other words, the same amount of material is being removed from one side of the plane to the other. So this bearing fits into this long slot in the blade, and the fact that it's a bearing is nice because it just makes the action a lot smoother instead of having metal grinding on metal, which some Chipbreakers or some planes have a lever cap pardon me, a lateral adjustment lever that's all one piece of metal. It's nice that this actually has a movable bearing. And that sometimes almost wants to snap in place, so you have to make sure that it's, when you put it in place, that it's actually properly seated. So carefully set that in there. You don't want to bang that sharp edge. Set that down. And I just wiggle a little bit, and then you can feel, tap it, that you know it's sitting on there exactly the way you want. Now the lever cap needs to go in, and it's going to go underneath this screw, and then you'll cock that lever to pull it down into place. And there's a certain tension that we want. So put it in place, slide it down, cock that lever. Now that transfers pressure on through the chip breaker onto the blade to help stabilize this in use. But you've got to be able to make adjustments. If it's not tight enough, it's going to move on you accidentally. If it's too tight, it makes it very hard to make those adjustments. So I always gauge it by how much effort it takes to slide the blade side to side. Now when I do this, I prefer to pinch. So my index finger is not pushing on the blade, my thumb is pushing on the lateral adjustment lever, and you have a lot more control when you do it like that. If it's really hard, back that off a little bit. Nice thing about this style of plane is you don't have to keep adjusting that. Every time you take it off and put it back together, it'll go back to the same spot. So this is called the adjustment wheel. This is a replacement that we make. It's called an adjustar, but same function. This, as you look at it, when you turn it clockwise, you're advancing the blade, meaning the yoke is pushing, it's hinged before it makes contact with the chip breaker, so it's going to push the blade out for a thicker shaving. Now there's always what we call backlash. So there's enough contact points, and there's a little bit of slop in each one, that when you want to retract the blade, you may have to turn it a few times in order for it to finally start to make contact. And now it's going to start pulling the blade out. So counterclockwise is going to retract the blade for a thinner shaving. Going the other way, clockwise, it's going to make the blade cut more. And it doesn't take a whole lot. And the nice thing about this is you just push your finger down on that paddle, and it gives you lots of leverage. First thing we're going to do is get that blade out far enough that we can see it. Now to do that, I like to have a really bright white background, and I'm going to look down my plane, not perfectly, I'm not looking straight down, I'm tipping the plane just a little bit so that the blade shows up. Okay, you can clearly see the blade, and I'm retracting it, and then if I went the other way, you're going to see the blade come out. I want to get it out enough that I can kind of have pretty good ability to judge when it's parallel. So as I look at that, I can see, and it's not a very great discrepancy, but it's sticking up a little bit higher on this side than it is on that side. So now I've got to look at my plane and decide, okay, which way do I push my lateral adjustment lever? Well, it's easy if you just remember, always push it toward the high side. So if the left side is high, I'm going to push this toward that side, and I pinch actually instead of pushing. Gives me a little more control, and I'll do that until it looks like it's parallel. Now, I'm not going to start planing with the blade out like that, so I'm going to start retracting it. And as I retract it, the amount of distance that I have to judge shrinks, so it's going to get to a point where I can have a much finer, the ability to make a finer adjustment as it almost disappears. And I'm watching to see if one side disappears before the other, and that's actually really close, so much so that the whole thing is going to disappear at once, it looks like. I don't think I need to make any more adjustments. But I'm going to pull the blade all the way in. I never want to start planing with the blade out any amount, because you may have it out more than you think, and you could possibly do damage to a finished piece. A little bit of wax. This is designed to reduce the friction between the sole of the plane and the wood, so that all of your effort is spent pushing the blade through the wood instead of pushing the plane over the wood. It just takes a little squiggle mark every once in a while. Now, while I'm planing, another feature about being able to easily turn this adjuster knob, while I'm planing, I'm going to start pushing that knob, and I'm going to watch to see where the first bit of shaving appears. Now it's a little bit heavy on the left side, so just a very slight movement. that again. Seems to be uniform. Now I'm going to do this again on the edge, because sometimes it's actually easier to verify the blade is parallel on edge work than it is on the face that I was doing. Same idea, planing until I start to pick up a shaving. Make a note of where the shaving is coming from, meaning which side, heavier on one than the other. Now wait till I get a full width shaving, in other words, got to get this edge flat first. Now, the way that shaving comes off tells me a lot. And as I unravel it, I'll notice that it looks pretty uniform in thickness. And it's also not veering to the left or to the right. Now, sometimes the grain will cause that, but on straight grain lumber, if the shaving is coming off and it's veering off to my left, then I know the shaving is heavier on the right and thin on the left. And if it's going off to the right, I know it's heavy on the left, thin on the right. So when I make that pass and I just leave the shaving alone, it makes a nice tight roll, stays in line, doesn't go one side or the other. So I'm pretty confident that that blade is set so that it is actually parallel to the sole. Why is that? Now the last comment here is, why do I pull that shaving out? Well, I don't like having to lift that plane up and set it back down every time for two reasons. Number one, I don't want the exercise. Number two, a slight clunking of the blade, of the plane, is going to change the setting. Watch how much heavier the shaving is going to be. I don't know how you could tell that or not, but I try to avoid bringing that up, having to set it down and worry about clunking it and changing the setting. Instead, I just stay on the same plane, pull the shaving out so that it doesn't get sucked back underneath when I'm retracting the plane. Does it hurt the blade? Not at all. And I find I can get into a rhythm that makes me more productive. I'm often asked, what do I start with? What's good wood to learn to plane? Well, there's a couple of things to consider. Number one, why would you want to use something that's really expensive that you're going to just turn into shavings on the floor? So it's nice to have an inexpensive material to practice on. Number two, you're learning technique. So why not minimize the effort required so that you can focus on technique? Move into the harder to plane materials once you've got the technique figured out, and now that becomes second nature and you can start to put a little more muscle into it. So what I'm planing is a piece of black spruce, where we live in eastern Canada, this is our preferred construction material. This is a 2x6, dry enough to plane. Shavings come off it beautifully. It planes easily. Not something I build furniture with, but it's certainly fun to plane. So find something that is easy to plane, allows you to go in and improve your technique. Part of the planing process that I think sometimes is ignored, and that is the body mechanics. You want to make it so that you don't even have to think about what you're doing. It just comes natural. Obviously that comes with practice, but you got to make sure that you're practicing the right techniques in order to get there. So when I start, and you'll notice that I'm not standing away out here and I'm not using my arms. If you do, you're using the smallest muscle group. It's going to be hard to be accurate, and you're also going to find that you get tired really quickly. The opposite of that is to use the weight of your upper body and your strength of your legs. Keep your arms from moving much at all, and just weight on the back foot, in this case my right foot, to start. And then as I start planing, I'm leaning forward and catching myself with my left foot. The plane really doesn't move much in relation to my body. That's the reason why I pull the shaving out. It gets stuck on there and then you run over it and you got to scratch it off the bottom. Now, that's the basics. Let's talk a little more. When we first start, all of the weight needs to be here. This hand is essentially just supporting the weight of the plane so it's not dropping down. and pushing forward. As soon as the blade engages the wood, you're going to feel some resistance. And a lot of times in feeling that, people push a little hard and it jumps. So you get this series of stutter marks, which become very difficult to eliminate because if you continue to play in the same direction, the plane just follows them. Let me tackle that in a moment. So when I'm doing a wide surface, I'm going to skew my plane. Here's the reason why. If we plane like this, blade or plane parallel to the board, we're referencing a surface just that wide. We want to make this surface flat and smooth. If we skew our plane like this, we're now referencing a surface that wide. So our ability to get the surface flat is going to be enhanced when we skew our plane so that we're reading a wider bit of the surface. So I'm going to start like this, wait here. As I feel the blade engage, I just kind of tighten everything up and just move forward nice and smooth. At this point, I'm pushing down like this with both hands. And as I get toward the end, there's going to be a sudden drop in resistance. And I don't want to nosedive off the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition from pushing down with my front hand to pushing forward. And I'm going to transition on my back hand from pushing at a 45-degree angle to pushing down even harder so that when I stop, my plane remains on that same plane that we have just planed. Now the final part, in order to get that perfect surface, the less thickness, the thickness of the shaving, the less pressure on the wood fiber, the better chance you're going to get a nice smooth cut. So I'm going to pull my blade in, and when I'm ready for that final finish, I'm going to take as light a shaving as I can and hopefully get as close to perfect a surface as possible. So I'm taking off a shaving that's probably measuring about a half a thou. And when we're done, shouldn't be able to feel any marks whatsoever. And you can take a piece of raw wood, hold it up to light, and you can actually see a reflection of whatever it is you're looking at in it. It's amazing. You want to be able to produce a surface like that, follow these instructions, get the sharpening down, get a decent plane. Hard to do this with an old junker. A decent plane, put a little bit of time in on it, and you'll be able to eliminate 80, maybe even 90% of your sanding. Good luck. If you like my work and enjoy my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos and help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the link below, the chisel and plane icon, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our online and in-person workshops.